Welcome to the Weights and Plates podcast. I am Robert Santana. I am your host, along with Trent Jones, my co-host.
Yo! What up?
What's up, man?
Oh, man, it's pretty quiet over here. I hear that you are getting ready to go to the Starting Strength Coaches Conference for 2022.
I am.
This is the first conference in... Did they have one? They didn't have one last year. Did they have one in 2020? I can't remember.
2019 was
2019,
the last one.
right? Yeah, because I went to that one. Yeah, so it's the first one in 2 years. I will not be going, unfortunately.
It is unfortunate.
Yeah.
We'd like to have you there.
Yeah, just not the right time with a young baby at home. But next year, for sure.
Yep. I hope we have it again next year. This should be good,
If
though.
interstate travel is still safe and available in 2023, then I'll be there.
Hopefully it is. So today I'd like to talk about a topic that I think is important for a lot of our listeners, because I think a lot of our listeners obviously lift, some with a coach, some on their own. And, we all have had to search for information on what to do when we don't have access to a coach. I used to look at magazines and message boards and websites for programs and try to follow them myself. And I've also hired a coach later on and got a lot of value out of that. So, in thinking about this I think that it's important for us to, dive in and talk about the difference between finding a program on the internet and trying to follow it and hiring someone to coach you and also define what all that means, what coaching is,
Yeah, right. Yeah, I think it's funny. You mentioned that, like, in the past, you've looked at magazines and routines and stuff like that. And I forget sometimes because I've been in this starting strength, kind of deeper strength training world for several years now. So I forget that, when I was like in college, a routine was just a routine. Like, you just did the movements, right? And if you didn't know what it was, then you just kind of look at a video, or if you could find one, or you just kind of like look at a description in a muscle mag where it's like, got drawings and shit. And you're like, okay, I got it. Cool. I'm good. I'll just do it. And now I'm like, there's so much more to it,
There's
we've talked about, there's so much more to it. Like we've talked about on this show, right? Like how much technique matters, obviously on the big barbell list, but even on the little stuff, right? Like if you're going to do a single arm dumbbell row, like how many people fuck those up? Like a lot of people, right? How many people fuck up their chin ups? A lot of people. How many people don't get the most out of their curls that they could? A whole lot of people. These are pretty easy things, but there's a huge difference between doing it right and doing it wrong and just doing it half-ass. And so right there, that experience that I've had alone tells me that you just are not going to get great results if you just if you look at a program as simply a bunch of sets and reps and exercise selections on a page. There's a lot more to it. That's actually maybe the least important part of it.
I would say that a program, and this is something I learned in my experience in research, a program, like any other instrument or protocol, has assumptions. There are assumptions behind that program. So we talk about starting strength a lot. It's a novice linear progression. Specifically, starting strength is the book. The novice linear progression is the program. And what you're getting from the book, or it's any website that has copied it over, is a template, right? A template for how to structure your training program and what sets and reps to do, right? So workout A, 3 sets of 5 squats, 3 sets of 5 press, 1 set of 5 deadlift. Workout B, 3 sets of 5 squats, 3 sets of 5 bench press, 1 set of 5 deadlifts. You add weight to the bar every time, 5 to 10 pounds on the squat the first couple weeks, 10 to 20 pounds on the deadlift the first couple weeks, and about 2.5 to 5 pounds on the press and the bench press the first week. Now, there's other phases to that, that build off of that. Then later on, you alternate the deadlift with the power clean. You do 5 sets of 3, try to add weight to that, a couple pounds per workout. And then later on, there's other permutations of it as you continue to add more and more intensity. So the squat and the deadlift, at least in the beginning, follow a linear progression. You're adding weight every single time, and all other variables stay exactly the same. You're still doing a squat. You're still doing 3 sets of 5. You're just changing the load, right?
Right. Yep.
The deadlift starts alternating with the power clean by week 3 or 4, depending on the lifter.
Yep.
And later on, you start spreading out the intensity too. It becomes nonlinear at some point because you start squatting light, heavy, light, heavy. So it's no longer a purely linear program. But this is more for a periodization discussion. For our purposes here, what I want to say is the assumption there, if you are just copying the program that's free on the internet, as people like to say, the assumption is that you are performing the technique as written in the Starting Strength Basic Barbell Training 3rd Edition textbook. That you have textbook technique every single time, and that you are fully recovered every single time, meaning you are eating enough, you are sleeping enough,
right?
You are gaining weight. Weight gain is an assumption of the program. If you need to gain weight, if you're overweight, you should be, maintaining your weight, losing inches. That's usually what we see with somebody who's truly overweight. But
right.
Typically, if you're an underweight novice, the assumption is you are eating in a surplus to gain body weight as you are performing these exercises. If you are an overweight novice, you are eating at maintenance or maybe a slight surplus, probably at maintenance, and losing inches off of.
I like to say if you're pretty fat, right? Like if you have a large amount of adipose tissue, then, that's the one scenario where you may be in a slight, you're eating at maintenance. And as your metabolic rate increases from the activity and from the lifting and from the gain in muscle mass, you might start to lose a little bit of weight. But we're talking about people who are borderline obese, if not obese in that case. If you're just kind of overweight, chances are you fall in that skinny fat category, in which case you should be eating to gain. Just want to clarify that.
Yeah,
we talked about skinny fat recently.
Yeah. If you are a skinny fat novice, you need to eat to gain. You may not need to gain as much as the skinny lean novice, but you need to gain. So those are your assumptions. You're sleeping enough. You're anabolic with your diet, meaning you're eating to gain weight if you're underweight. You're eating at maintenance if you're overweight. And your technique is impeccable and mirrors that which is in the book. It also assumes that you are incrementally loading the lifts as instructed in the book, meaning your bench press is going to go up a couple pounds after the first few weeks, right? Your press is going to go up a couple of pounds after the first few weeks. Your deadlift is going to go up by a lot the first 2 weeks, and then a little bit less in the remaining weeks. You might go up 20 pounds per workout on week 1 and then stay at 10 for the next few months if you're truly a rank novice, right?
Right.
So there's all these assumptions, but in practice, and you can go on the Starting Strength boards and see this in the training logs, you will find that even people who are reporting what they're doing on the Starting Strength website aren't doing the program as described. I mean, this is just incredibly common. Rip has an article called A Clarification, which I recommend reading. If you Google Starting Strength A Clarification or Mark Ripito A Clarification, it's a good synopsis of what happens when you hand somebody a template and say, all right, do this program exactly as it's written, follow all these rules. They don't do the program. So much that Rip had to write an article 12 years ago about it. And this applies to anything. I mean, if we could, you can go on the internet and pretty much find anything these days. Back in the day, you can go to a bookstore or library and find written information on how to do things. Some bad, some good. But let's take something, you're a musician. I'm a quasi-musician and amateur musician, I guess. I've just bought an actual instrument recently, but I used to DJ.
Right
So I like to use musical examples. You can go buy a guitar, and there's plenty of books and videos on how to play it. How many people self-teach that aren't gifted and, go on to become successful guitarists, right?
Yeah, very few.
Exactly. Then there's people that do self-teach and never become successful guitarists. So, ability's not all of it, but that's a different story. But the whole point is you have access to information on how to play a guitar. But does that mean you're going to use that information to get yourself to a high level of proficiency?
No, it's not. And in fact, I actually do have some numbers off the top of my head on this. So Fender has studied this for years. Of all the people who buy our guitars, Fender's guitars, how many people end up playing guitar past like the year mark or 2-year mark, right? And it's somewhere a little less than 10% end up playing guitar for the long period of time. Now, that's nothing to say about how proficient they get at it. Like a lot of these people, I suspect, probably get to just a very beginner level and stay there forever, right?
Yeah, that's right.
But it's about 10% of the people who buy a guitar will end up playing that guitar still a couple years later. And Yeah, I mean, that's not surprising, right? Like you mentioned the not doing the program article. I'm recalling an article that was posted on the Starting Strength website called you didn't do the program with Nick Rakulia, who is I believe he's got a PhD. I believe he has some sort of like statistics background.
Oh yeah.
But
He's a numbers guy.
So they basically went through, as of 2015 or 2016, they went through all of those Starting Strength novice logs that you were talking about on the website that were posted. And they statistically analyzed, like, well, how many of the people actually did the program and what kind of results did they get? And I want to say that the adherence rate to people who followed the program to a T and did everything right was like, I don't know, like 2%, 3%. It was really low.
It was very
exceptionally low.
And they still made progress.
And now a lot of people made progress even fucking it up. And that's the thing. Progressive overload, even if you fuck it up, works. It works pretty well. And the novice effect works. But it was basically almost everyone bastardized the program to some extent.
Yeah, so that's the whole point. You can hand somebody a manual on how to do something, and you are probably going to fuck it up. If I hand you a program and say follow it, you are probably going to fuck it up. And those of you that don't probably will end up working alongside of me as a colleague.
Yeah, right. Although I will say that even coaches, like, part of the reason why you hire a coach is because we have fucked up all the things that you can fuck up, and we had to fix it. And so we've gotten proficient at identifying the problem. We have personal experience with the problem often, and we've had to fix it ourselves, and that's what makes us good as coaches. Like, you tore your adductor, and you tore it again from squatting improperly, right? So you're very sensitive now to understanding the things that are going to lead to a torn adductor if you're fucking them up, right?
Right.
I've had, patellar tendonitis a couple of times. It really sucked, and I had to rebuild my squat technique to fix that. I've had biceps tendonitis. I've had all these things, and I've fixed them, so that makes me a good coach. And that's the thing about handing someone a program, a template, without coaching, is that what people lack, whether it's playing an instrument or trying to lift weights with good technique, what people lack is the ability to evaluate where they're at and what mistakes they're making.
Exactly.
You can look at all the videos you want of how to play chords and scales and stuff like that on the guitar. What you may not realize is, like, are you even holding the pick correctly? Are you playing with too much tension? Are you fretting the notes in the right spot on the fretboard? Because if you're messing those things up, then you're never going to get the chords and the scales. You're never going to get the proficiency with them that you need. So a lot of people might be like, well, this program just sucks. Well, no, you're not getting the fundamentals right. And we can say the exact same thing about barbell training.
Yeah, no, that's 100% correct. I train on my own these days, and it seems to be working fine. I'm progressing steadily each year, but I worked with coaches for a while. But the reason I bring this up now is because, let's say you decide to hire a coach, and your coach gives you the linear progression and says, well, dude, you're squatting high, you're rounding your back on the deadlift, your press is going 7 inches in front of you, and you're gripping it too wide, and you're bouncing the bar off your chest on the bench press while tap dancing. The most common things we see with novices.
Right.
So we're going to start over, take the weight off, and we're going to follow the program. And then you turn around and try to tell me, well, hey, I could have got this program for free.
Right.
And people, and we get this, this happens.
Yeah.
People say these things,
Absolutely.
So we feel that this needs to be addressed. When you hire a coach, chances are, if you're hiring someone who's proficient at something, the information aspect of it is probably available elsewhere. That's not what you're paying for. Information has become very cheap or free these days,
Right. Exactly.
So that's like saying, okay, I wrote a book on how to play golf, and I followed the program on how to swing the club and all that shit, and now my golf coach wants me to do exactly what's in the book because he says I've been doing it wrong. I've been doing it wrong on my own. So what the fuck am I paying him for? That's free. All that's in the book.
Right. Yeah. Despite the fact that these people never ask themselves too. They're like, oh, well, but it's not working what I'm doing.
Yeah.
Generally the people who have a problem with this have tried it on their own, and they haven't gotten anywhere. And they're convinced that it's some sort of magic programming decision. It's just the sets and reps need to be changed somehow, or like the exercises need to be picked in a certain order. And once I get that right, things will start to move again. And I think a lot of times these people are looking for programming solutions to technique and recovery issues.
Mm-hmm. or programming solutions to body composition issues.
Or body composition issues. Yeah. Yeah.
Because I deal with both in my line of work. And what I will say is that when you hire somebody to help you with anything, not just lifting a barbell or designing a training program, they are going to use some sort of template that you can probably find on the internet. That's just how it is. Because in general, humans have a finite number of ways to move, okay? We have a finite number of joints and muscles on our body, The specifics, and the finer details can vary across individuals. One person's stance might be different on the deadlift than the other. I might have an old guy only squat twice a week, after week 1 or 2,
Right.
I might use a safety squat bar for an old guy. I might do a high bar squat for a guy with tight shoulders. I might, some of the guys that I train might not even bench. They might just press,
Right.
And you learn that once you start watching people move. So here's another thing that you get, when somebody hires a coach, might say, well, I can't do X exercise because it hurts. Well, the assumption of that statement is that you've been doing X exercise the way that I would teach you to do it. And the chances are, the odds are against that. Odds are highly against that. So show me what it looks like. Keep the weight light enough to where it's not going to actually injure you. It might hurt a little bit, but show me what you're doing now. Every time people actually do that, I find a bunch of things wrong. I fix it and they start feeling better,
Yeah. So let me ask you a question on that front.
Yeah.
So of all the people that have reached out to you for coaching, I assume some are going to be rank novices that are just totally new to this, but a lot of people probably have previous exposure to the program, especially people that find you through the starting strength materials, articles and the directory and stuff.
Right.
Of all the people that you've worked with, day one, they send you videos or you see them in person in the gym. How many of them had rock solid, great technique where you're like, yeah, we can maybe change some tiny little things here, but you look great already?
I'd say less than 1%.
Right, yeah. It's basically nobody. Everybody's screwing it up to some degree.
The number is greater than 0, but not by much.
Not by much,
Once
right?
in a blue moon, I might see a guy that comes in and say, okay, move your feet out a little bit, fix this. And wow, you've self-taught pretty good, dude, but that's not very often,
Yeah, very, very rare. I almost everyone that I work with, even the great movers, is screwing something up.
And when I have seen that, when I'm most impressed, it's usually when the squat's right on. But then you get to like the deadlift.
Yeah,
it's
right.
Like all fucked up,
Yeah,
like,
there's always something.
Yeah, because, squat's the most complex lift that we teach. So I expect that to be a train wreck most of the time. But occasionally I'll get a guy that looks just like the textbook. We'll move to the squat, we'll move to the press, we'll move to the bench press, maybe some finer adjustments here. We'll get to the deadlift and it's a train wreck.
Yeah, right.
Or vice versa, the squat's a train wreck and then the
Deadlifts
other
are pretty
lifts
good.
are fine.
Yeah, right.
Like, I'm like, whoa, you didn't round your back in the deadlift? I'm like shocked when I see that.
Yeah.
But the point is, what does a coach do? You're hiring a coach to supervise you, first of all, because you can't supervise yourself. The idea that you know exactly how you're moving is flawed from the fact that you can't watch yourself. And if you do video yourself, it's still flawed because the assumption there is that you have an eye for what's fucked up, and you probably don't because you haven't watched millions of people do this, You haven't developed that yet.
Right. And it's even if you do, right? So like you and I have watched just thousands and thousands and thousands of squats and deadlifts and stuff. I notice that even when I'm looking at my own videos, I can point out problems here and there, but I'm blind to my own problems a lot of times because I think a lot of times I don't want to be wrong.
Right.
Like I don't want to admit the fact that like, yeah, those deadlifts were not that great. You could fix that up. I'd be like, that move's fine. Yeah, it's good enough. It's just fine. Whereas somebody that's, when a coach is watching your movements, like I'm dispassionate. I really don't care. I have nothing emotionally invested in how well your set goes. I'm totally neutral when I'm watching these videos. And nothing is going to upset me. Nothing's going to make me go. I mean, I get excited when people do it right, when they've been really struggling. That's great. This gets me excited. But like, there's no emotional response wrapped up in me watching your squat set. And therefore, I'm dispassionately kind of marking down the things that you need to fix, right? And prioritizing them. And that's, even if you really know what you're looking at and you're a coach, that's really hard to do for yourself.
It's just, you're just not going to do it.
Yeah.
So, yeah, again, you're assuming that, you've done everything correctly on your own and you need something novel. And chances are you fucked up a lot of things on your own and you need the same thing applied correctly. And when you hire somebody to coach you, you're hiring somebody that can identify your errors and correct them, and troubleshoot sticking points. For instance, I may get through the technique stuff in the first few, usually the first day if it's in person, maybe the first week or two. If it's online and the person's reasonably coordinated. If they're uncoordinated, it takes longer. But, we might get through that. Then we might start adding weight. Then you start missing reps because you are sleeping 5 hours a day, or you're not. Right. You're eating 80 grams of protein when you need 180.
Right.
Or you're not eating enough carbs because you've been doing keto.
Yep. Or you're resting. You're resting 2 minutes between sets instead of 5 minutes.
And when you're on your own, you're going to downplay all of that because when you're on your own and you don't have experience with this, the common thing that most of us are going to think is, well, I showed up and I worked hard. That's all that matters, And you may not even be consciously thinking that, but you're feeling that, And then you're like trying to minimize all these other factors outside of the weight room,
Yeah.
So, it's just one of many examples. The whole point is I'm here watching you fuck it up and telling you you're fucking it up and telling you how to fix it. That's what you hire a coach for. If you just want to program, you can find those on the internet,
Right. Yeah. And there's so much that goes into that. There's these basic factors that we see beginners mess up quite a bit. For me, I work with a lot of older folks, folks that are a lot of over 40. Like almost everyone I work for is over 40. Quite a few are over 50 and quite a few are in their 60s. I even have some trainees in their 70s that I work with. And that's a whole nother ball game because you may say, like you said, oh, I can't squat, it hurts my knees. And they're like, well, we can, let's see what we got here. Let's see what we work with. But, sometimes it's true that they can't do the textbook technique, or they can't go to the perfect range of motion. Like they can't get their hip crease just below the top of the patella and hit those landmarks that we expect in a textbook starting strength style squat. But they may be able to squat an inch higher to a box, right? Same thing with a press. They may not have 180 degrees of shoulder flexion, but they may be able to get 165, 170, right? And so they may not be able to move the bar in a perfectly straight line, but they can move it in a fairly straight line. And so we do that. And that's having a coach be able to tell you like, okay, no, that's just something you're messing up. You're messing up the technique and the execution is wrong. Versus, hey, listen, you've got some anatomical issues going on, right? Your joints don't move like they used to. And we're going to have to adapt. We're going to have to modify the movement to work. But we can, and here's how we're going to do it, right? That's another thing that you're paying for with a coach is telling you like what stuff is prioritizing for you, right? Telling you where to put your focus and where to not worry about stuff. So like, yeah, I have some guys, their upper back looks like a question mark. They're so kyphotic. Like their deadlift is never going to look like their back is set in a straight line. Because they can't. They physically can't. So I tell them, like, hey, listen, don't worry about that. Don't worry about that, right? What we're going to work on is making sure your lower back's set.
Right.
Some guys who just can't squat to depth because of, like, I've had some post-op hip patients, but I'm like, okay, we're going to squat an inch high, but we're going to do it every time. And as long as you do that, you're fine. We're not going to a powerlifting meet here. There's no judges besides me. So there's that aspect too.
Yeah, absolutely. So what we're really hitting on a lot here is that, we spend a lot of time coaching technique. And that's not surprising because starting strength is 90% of that book is dedicated to technical execution of the 5 main lifts with a small portion dedicated to programming. That's why he published the gray book separately. Practical Programming for Strength Training, 3rd edition. That's the programming book. So, we spend a lot of time coaching technique because barbell lifts and free weight exercises in general are limited by technique because you have to stabilize yourself while you move. That's the biggest reason. These are very specific movements. Most people can learn them, but if you are less coordinated, that's going to take you longer, which means your progression is not going to be so linear because you're going to spend more time fucking around with technique and motor learning than somebody who's, a little bit more proficient can pick it up, right? So, got to be patient with yourself. You get guys that come in and they want to either lift these big numbers or get this dramatic body composition change in a short period of time, but then they get pissed off that, there's no measurable progress in terms of numbers because we're spending all this time on technique, right?
Right.
So, my rebuttal to that is, well, if you don't want to spend time on technique and all you care about is body composition, go do a bunch of machines because they're practically idiot-proof. And they're still technical, by the way. You can hurt yourself on a leg press if you don't control your back,
Oh, absolutely.
But sure, you don't have to stabilize your body as much if you're on a machine. And then add a little bit of weight to those each time. This is for, the Gen Pop listener who does not give a shit about strength or performance and just wants to look a certain way. You're going to look better with a barbell, first of all, but it's going to take you a long time if you're a motor moron because you're going to fuck around a lot trying to fix your technique. If you're at a gym like mine in person, that speeds it up. That's not always an option,
Yeah.
But,
right.
It speeds things up when you have somebody there watching you in real time, making the corrections, giving you those tactile cues so you can feel those muscles work and perform the movements you need to perform. You're going to go further, But if you're training on your own or with an online coach and you're a motor moron, expect this to take a while. Expect this to take a while because you're going to spend more time on technique than somebody who's a little more athletic.
Yeah, exactly. I found that as I get older, my time becomes more and more precious. Like literally, my day is busier than it used to be 10 years ago, even 5 years ago. But also I'm getting closer to the day that I won't be here anymore on planet Earth, right? So my time is getting more and more precious as I get older. And so I'm finding more and more value in good mentorship and good coaching in all aspects of my life. And I'm much more likely to try to find somebody who's competent to teach me something than I am to try to self-teach nowadays.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And part of the reason is because, I already said it, but I just want to reiterate it. It's because what a good mentor or coach or whatever teacher does for you is helps you figure out where you are now, which you're not always, it's really hard to self-evaluate. I had this experience recently. One of the things that I do besides barbell coaching is I'm an audio engineer. I produce podcasts. Mm-hmm. I've produced, at this point, thousands of episodes.
I didn't know that, man.
Right? You didn't know
Maybe
that.
I should hire you.
So, I've mixed a lot of podcasts. All right. I've mixed a fair amount of music as well, but that's a skill that I'm still developing. Mm-hmm. And I've gotten pretty good at it, but I hired a guy to just do a little bit of, basically a little bit of mentorship, right? I just paid him for a couple of coaching lessons. I was like, hey, I want to send a couple of mixes to you that I've done of these musical tracks that I've made. And I need some feedback. I don't know where I'm missing. And one of the things I said is I'm having trouble with having my snare drum sound present in the mix without having to turn it way up and drown everything else out. Mm-hmm. And so I was convinced it was some sort of thing I was messing up with the snare drum in the mixing process to make it cut like it's supposed to. And he immediately comes back and he's just hammering me about the bass. He's like, dude, your bass, what's going on? The bass is all over the place. You got way too much low end going on. I'm like, what are you talking about? The bass sounds fine here. That's not what I need help with. I need help with the snare. And he's hammering about this stuff. And so I'm like, okay, all right, he's hearing something I don't. Let me just try this. And I remixed the track with his suggestions. And the snare pops out. The snare sounds great now. I'm like, what the hell? I just changed the bass. I didn't do anything to the snare. Okay, well, that's just the same example as what we're talking about here is that I couldn't hear what I had. I could not yet hear what he was hearing because I hadn't identified the problem yet. He was literally hearing this swampy, low-frequency mess that I had created that I couldn't even hear it. Mm-hmm. That was the thing. It's not like I lacked the right fix for it. It's that I couldn't even hear the problem in the first place.
Exactly.
And he did. And that's what the coaching did for me. And that's why I'm finding in all aspects of my life, when I can afford it, I really like to work with people, with good coaches, because that's what they offer that a program or a written manual can never do for you. There's never that evaluation process.
Right. And same thing applies to diet. I run into some of the same problems, right? I'll give out a general, start somebody out with a general diet template based on estimates that I make based on height, weight, age, sex, and, maybe some data that they provided me. I come up with these ballpark figures and give a general template of how to distribute their macros throughout the day, give them a list of foods that they can choose from, the most common things available. If they have questions about things outside of there, I tell them, yeah, you can have that. That's fine. I'm pretty flexible with that. But at the end of the day, if you come to me and you're a 45-year-old male or female, let's say you're 5'8", you're 200-pound male, and you're untrained, you need to lose weight, because you're untrained, or let's say you're, a 200-pound female at any height, you're probably going to get a similar breakdown as somebody else that's in the same boat as you, because I don't know you, I have no way to predict your idiosyncrasies or any individual issue that you have. You can tell me things like, oh, I'm following these macros. Okay, well, that's data. I can build off those. I might go a little bit higher, because I always assume that there's a margin upward, so there's things that I do there. But at the same time, I'm going to make similar estimates if I'm dealing with a complete stranger whose body I don't know yet, right?
Right, yep.
And, I've had that same thing. You gave me a template. And it's like, yeah, and what? If you downloaded it off the internet yourself, you probably did it wrong. Let's go back to the classic, for those academics out there listening, the Danziger study from 2005. It's one of my favorite professional research articles to cite. And I reviewed it with Sullivan a couple years ago. John Sullivan, the author of The Barbell Prescription, a book that I recommend for my 40-pluses. Anyways, we reviewed this article because it's my favorite one to cite when I'm talking about this phenomena. They compared 4 different diets, I believe. It was Zone versus Atkins versus Ornish versus Weight Watchers. And they had a registered dietitian educate the research participants on how to follow these diets, right? Which meant that they came in, they gave them a bunch of paperwork on what the diet entails, what they're supposed to eat, etc., and told them to follow it every day and then kicked them back home to do it. So basically they handed them a diet. These people followed it on their own. They came back. They kept food logs. They provided data. Now, people who listen to me regularly know how I feel about food logs, but this gets interesting. So the Ornish diet is 10% of your calories or less from fat. So it's a very low-fat diet, right?
Right, yep.
And the people that were randomly assigned to the group that had to follow the Ornish diet ate too much fat. Shocking. And that's according to their self-report, so it's probably much higher,
Yeah.
But they reported more fat than that 10%, a lot more. The people on the Atkins diet were instructed to eat 20 grams of carbohydrate or less. That's what I remember Atkins being. I don't have the paper in front of me, but it's probably not far off from that. And guess what? They ate too many carbs. The people on the Zone diet were supposed to eat 40% of their calories from protein, 30% of their calories from fat, and 30% of their calories from carbohydrate, 40, 30, 30. I think if you're truly following Zone, you're supposed to do that every meal too, but I don't remember. I never got into Zone.
Yeah.
But never got into Zone, man. But they didn't eat enough protein. So we see a theme here, right? It's really hard to eat a lot of protein unless you're instructed to do so. It's really hard to stay on a very low-fat diet for very long, or even for a short period of time. It's very hard. It's logistically hard. And it's also very hard to stay on a very low-carb diet for very long, right?
Right.
I think the Weight Watchers came out the best, which is unsurprising. People that follow it tend to follow it until, they don't, but as with any diet, but it tends to be easier to follow because it's a point system and it doesn't really, I don't know how it's structured now, but back in the day it was a point system. I think that's the same, but they didn't discriminate between good foods and bad foods, just you had to add up your points. So I could see that being easier to follow. I don't have the data on that, but I'm pretty sure they probably reported going over their points. Now, let me remind everybody, they reported not doing the program. They reported not doing the program. So that means they probably really didn't do the fucking program,
Exactly, yes.
Because we don't have actual intake. We have reported intake. So, again, you hire me, you're going to get a meal plan to follow, and somebody else might get a similar one, if you have a medical condition, it might restrict certain things here and there. But again, if you're doing an apples-to-apples comparison, you get 2 people that are the same height and weight, same training age, and I know nothing else about you, never worked with you before, you're going to get something similar to the next guy. You might even get something that looks similar to something you download off the internet because the information isn't what you're paying for. That's free. You're absolutely right. That is free. If you just want information and a diet template, or a menu of meals to follow, you can get that off the internet and just do a one-time payment. Eventually I have these on my website. I don't sell those yet, but more of the design part of it. I need to start designing them. I don't know how to make things pretty. It's not my forte. But if I can make
you hire people for that, right?
I do. I have a couple people that can probably get that done. So once I get that done, I'll probably have menus and meal plans available on the website. But you can download that. You can get recipe books. Like if you just want information, that's free. But
right.
That's like, if you buy a guitar on your own and then go to a guitar coach or teacher, guitar instructor. Let's say you buy a guitar, go to a guitar instructor, and he tells you, well, you have to have a guitar. And let's get started. And then, well, fuck this guy. He told me to get a guitar. I already knew to do that,
Right.
I did that on my own. What the fuck did I need him for? I already bought the guitar. It's the same thing, The template that you get is the guitar. Now, you know more about that instrument than I do. There's things you can do to a guitar to modify it to help the person out, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, right. And you're a good teacher might pick up your guitar, just hold it for a second and be like, oh, the strings, they're kind of high here. That's going to make it difficult for you to play. So let's make a couple adjustments here and make that easier for you, right? But yeah, I think what you're describing is, we have to remember like how the starting strength template, if you will, even came about in the first place. Like, why the heck do we do 5s? Why 3 sets of 5? Why not 5 sets of 5? Well, that's what Strong Lifts does. Why not 5 sets of 5? Why not 10 sets of 5? Well, the whole reason that we picked that in the first place is because, from empirical data of coaching a whole bunch of people over the years, we have determined that sets of 5 are a nice sweet spot between intensity, as in you can do them very heavy, which we know heavy is what drives strength, but they're also enough reps that you get a hypertrophy stimulus, right? So you're putting your muscles under tension for a long enough period of time to make you stronger. And there's an added aspect of this is that when you are a novice, 5 reps is also enough practice to get good at lifting weights. Because remember, you don't get good at lifting light weights. You don't get good at technique by lifting light weights a whole bunch of times. You get good at technique by practicing lifting heavy weights by making them heavier every time, right? Like you're never going to get good at squatting 225 with good technique by doing a whole bunch of warm-ups at 135. Your 135 will look awesome and your 225 is going to have whatever problem it has, right? You get better by lifting 225 with better technique. It's a skill. It's a mental skill and a physical skill.
100%.
Right? Yeah, so that's why we picked 5s in the first place. It's not because that 5 is the perfect magic number that just has something about it that makes you stronger than anything else. We could have done 3s, we could have done 8s, but we found that 5s are the sweet spot. Same thing with 3 sets of 5. It seems to be enough work for most people to drive progress for a while. Okay, so the way that we approach things in coaching is with everything is kind of a similar thing, right? Like we have to start you somewhere. There's got to be some sort of structure to start with. So that's where we start you, and we adjust as needed, right? Based on our observations of how you're doing with the starting point.
Absolutely.
So it's not that this program it has any magic to it. It's just simply that it's a good starting point based on our experience with lots and lots of other people, and then we modify it as we go. And guess what? That's what happens if you actually do the program and you stick with it. You're eventually going to become an advanced lifter if you do this long enough. And when you become an advanced lifter, advanced lifters have much more individualized programs, right? Because they have to adapt things as they go, right? So it's just a process of iteration that we do, and that's the difference between coaching and just template hopping, right?
Yeah, and if you want to progress inefficiently because an intermediate program is more entertaining for you, you can do that. But again, you can download that off the internet. That's not what you're paying a coach for.
Right.
If all you want is information, that's a lot cheaper than hiring somebody. Because you're
absolutely
right. If I'm just handing you a template and that's all you want and you're not interested in the other aspects of coaching, the guidance, then don't fucking hire a coach,
Yeah.
Download the template. You can buy the templates are pretty cheap. I think what does Baker charge? $30 or something?
Yeah, I think you can even get a deal if you buy a few of them at a time.
But what we do for you is we guide you through the process of following that template as intended. We make sure the application is correct because you're likely to fuck it up doing it on your own. It happens all the time. We're human. We're guilty of it ourselves, as we've said. But, you're not hiring me to design a fancy program for, a textbook on strength and conditioning program design. That's not what you're hiring me for. You're hiring me to guide you through the process of getting stronger or building muscle, or getting healthier. Some people just want to exercise, and I work with those people too. But the recipe is not all that complicated, and there's only so many permutations of programming that you can do. There's a line to be drawn. I'm not going to sit here and I'm probably not going to give you a band program. I'm going to say, you should just go to LA Fitness and hire somebody there, because I got to draw the line somewhere. I'm not going to be very motivated to do that for you, So,
right. I'm not a bodybuilding coach. If you're like, hey man, I want to be a great bodybuilder. That's just not what I do. I'm sorry, man. I can get you real strong if you're a total beginner. I can give you a good foundation, but I'm not the guy if you want that. It's okay.
I enjoy that stuff, but I don't compete in bodybuilding. I like that type of training to an extent, but I don't compete in it. I don't take steroids. So I can't help you if you want to compete in that sport at a high level.
Right.
I can help you build muscle. I can help you lose body fat. I use barbells. I use dumbbells. I use machines. I'm not a strongman coach, so I can't really program that,
Right. Yeah.
There's certain things. I don't CrossFit, so if you want WODs, you can go hire a CrossFit coach, so I understand all that. But when you hire a coach, you're paying for guidance. The information is highly accessible and relatively cheap these days. Information's not that expensive anymore, not like it used to be.
Yeah.
But if you want to learn how to use the information correctly, that is what you are paying a coach for.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think I think that's really well said. So maybe we can wrap up on, how do you become more coachable if you do hire a coach? Because there's to get the most out of your hard-earned dollars that you're spending on coaching, because I know it's not cheap. Mm-hmm. You want to be coachable, right? And how do you do that? Well, I find that the people that are the best to get the best results and they're the easiest to coach for me are the people who, first of all, are open-minded with their technique, right? And they're willing to try out changes. And this can be hard when you're working. This is easier when you're starting with novices who don't really have an idea of what good technique feels like or looks like in the first place. This can be really hard for people who have been lifting for several years and maybe have some deeply embedded errors in their technique that they need to kind of back up and address. But if you have an open mind, be like, hey, listen, let's just try it for me, okay? And it's the same thing with if it's an exercise that you're not familiar with, or you've never done before, or it's a programming style that you're not familiar with, then just be open-minded and give it a try. And look for how is this program working for me, not in the first 3 weeks or the first 6 weeks, but give it 3 months. How's it going after 3 months? And then you can kind of make an honest call. Like, am I really getting what I wanted out of this program? Am I communicating well with my coach? And is he getting me to a place that I couldn't have gotten to on my own? Now, I'm not saying 3 months is going to give you ripped abs and the awesome body that you want. What I'm saying is that are you starting to make progress? Because sometimes it takes a while when you're working with somebody new to fully understand the system that they're putting you through. And it does me no good if I start to work with somebody, there's no good for me to sit here and explain top to bottom every single thing that I'm going to do for you. Because it's just it'd be just like blasting a fire hose in your face of information. It's not useful yet, right? I just know I have a system. It's like, if you just let me work it for you, then I think we're going to get you to a good place. But it's going to take some time. And I think just knowing that and being okay with that and being vulnerable sometimes is an important part of being coachable.
Absolutely. Yeah, what I would say is, the most coachable client is one who can go in knowing that he's probably fucking something up, plain and simple.
Yeah, sure.
And, it's hard for some people, and you have to be able to take criticism, and you have to be prepared for trial and error, especially if you're an intermediate, because
there is
period of time where your coach has to learn how you respond to things.
Yeah, sure.
We're all making estimates when you're brand new. I have no idea what the hell your body does over a long enough timeline. It's not something that I know. And the only way to find that out is to collect data. And the more further along you are on the adaptation curve, the more intermediate or advanced you are, the more time we have to spend doing that, And,
Right.
It's normal, like, again, if you're late intermediate or an advanced lifter, PRs are happening less frequently. So we have to spend several months. You want things directionally going in the right way. If you're beat up week 2, not going anywhere, you probably fuck something up, then you have to adjust that, but that really generally shouldn't happen. You're on the side of easing in versus diving in,
Yes.
So,
yeah. Same here. Always.
And that's what any coach should do. I make no assumptions. And, that's what's important. You have to understand that the post-novice phase is where people get weeded out because training is less predictable, more sensitive to factors outside of the gym,
Right.
and much more nonlinear, What I've noticed with advanced is it becomes predictable again, but you're just training in months and years, so you're just kind of directionally moving and you're going in a certain direction and you eventually get there. Like sometimes I get interrupted. I did a bad hike 2 weeks ago, had to reset my squat because it just wrecked me. And, I knew to go lighter that week. I thought the next week I'd get it back. Then I slept like shit. So, now I did a little reset working back up. But intermediate was the most fucking volatile moment or volatile phase that I've been through as a lifter because you're just figuring it all out. You don't know what you need. Progress is there one week. It's not there the next week. You feel strong one week. You don't feel strong the next week. It's a novel experience because you've never been through it before. It's like, I always use the analogy. It's like when you grow your hair long, there's that in-between phase where it's not long, it's not short, and it just looks like shit. That's intermediate training, essentially. And then your hair just gets long. That's advanced training,
Yeah. Right.
And if you shave your head, it grows real fast. That's the novice effect, So that's my favorite analogy for it. And I noticed that when people go from novice to intermediate, you find out who really just, wants to push their limits and become a more advanced lifter or gain more muscle mass beyond the newbie gains. And, who doesn't? And there's various reasons for that. People don't like to hear this, but, if you want a dramatic transformation and you don't have the genetics for this, you're in this for a few years, those 6 to 9 months of newbie gains. After that, you're in for some frustration. It's part of the ride, man,
Right.
And it's going to be more demanding on your time. It becomes like a part-time job,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And, I'd say with this, like, I like the way you put that you got to be ready for some trial and error because that's the way that programming and the stuff works, right? Even technique fixes are like that. I don't know. I can't get inside your head and understand exactly how you're going to interpret a cue that I give you.
No.
Right? So sometimes I have to try a couple before we land on something that really sticks.
Now that's magnified online.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's magnified online because I can't get in there and like physically put you in the position with my hands, right? To make you feel what you're supposed to feel. So yeah, I like the way you put that. That is an important part of being coachable. And I'd say the last thing is that good communication, right? The people that I do the best job for are the ones that keep an open line of communication and they tell me how they're feeling. If they're like, hey, after that workout, like my elbow's really killing me and it's kind of lingering here. Okay. I want to hear that. I want to know that rather than the person who's like, hey, I tried to press and I can't even get the bar off my chest once. And I'm like, whoa, what's going on here? That's kind of weird. That's out of the blue. And they're like, oh dude, my right elbow has been killing me for like, it's just killing me. And then I'll dig in. It's like, oh, really? Like, well, how long has this been going on? Oh, like about 3 weeks. And I'm like, well, fuck. Like, well, I worked you into a hole now that I didn't know about. Yeah. And now we got to back up and dig you out of that hole. If you just would have told me the first couple of days, then maybe we could have adjusted and not gotten ourselves to this point, right? So an open line of communication. And then the other thing too is like when people are open about not understanding something, right? So if you don't understand what I'm saying with a cue, if it's like, hey, I don't quite understand what you're saying, or I'm confused about rest times or whatever, I'd much rather you ask the question and let me clear it up for you than you just make a bunch of assumptions and then like move on and just, and sometimes that comes from inexperience. Like you just don't know that it's an issue that you need to be worried about, and that's okay. But, I'd much rather you ask the question than not ask the question. Right. I've only had a couple of people who ask too many questions. And even then we get to a good place. But I've had a lot of people who don't give me any feedback, and they're impossible to work with. We can't do it, especially online. So,
yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's online's not for everybody, and there's no substitute for in-person coaching from a competent coach. It's just, there's not a lot of us out there,
Right.
This information's relatively new. I think the first edition of the book was published 17 years ago, almost 18 years ago.
Yeah, 05, right?
Yeah.
2005, I think.
Man, 11 years since the first printing of the third edition. So, a lot of people don't know how to coach these lifts effectively. There's some people that probably accidentally get it right through other methods, but they're few and far between. I mean, look at what you see at the Globo gym,
Yeah, right.
with personal trainers, weird fucking movements and... we don't even have to go into that, but the whole point is
heinous abuse of machines.
Yeah, exactly.
Let's watch those gym fail videos on YouTube.
Yeah. But, the point is, you hire a coach, you're paying for guidance, not information. They're going to guide you through whatever process you need to go through to achieve whatever goal you need to achieve. And this can apply to anything. The information is probably the same information that you can access on your own. That's not what you're paying for, and that goes for diet coaching, that goes for training, and that goes for pretty much anything. That's what a coach does. We teach you how to do things you can't do yourself.
Yeah.
And, you're not a programmer, you're a lifter,
Exactly.
If you want to learn how to be a programmer, you can, a training programmer, not a software engineer or anything like that. But if you want to learn how to design training programs, and you can be an apprentice, and you still, you're going to be under the supervision of somebody who's going to show you how to apply information that you can probably access yourself,
Exactly. If you are a millennial, this probably goes for Gen Xers too, but I think this is probably mostly aimed at millennials. Think about all of the time that you have spent over the last 10 years learning about stuff online. 10 years ago, it was probably reading blogs. Nowadays, it's probably watching YouTube videos about something. And think about how many of those things have actually gotten you to a advanced level of skill at whatever you're doing. Like, I don't know, wood carving, right? If you're like, I want to learn how to whittle, chess pieces. Okay. You can look up YouTube videos. There's a lot of wood carvers on YouTube. Some great stuff.
Oh, yeah.
But how much of that experience and all that time that you've spent has actually led to you developing a high degree of skill? I know for me, I can answer that. Very little of it. Very little of it. There are a couple things that I've self-taught to a fairly high degree of skill. I had a knack for them already, but I've made leaps and bounds of gains by just doing like some small, like really, frankly, not even very much in-person coaching, but I've done a little bit of in-person coaching on those things. And every time I do that, I make huge gains. And all the time that I've spent hours and hours reading shit on the internet or watching YouTube videos, I really don't have much to show for it. And I think I'm willing to bet that's a lot of people out there, especially in the millennial generation, because we're kind of like the kings of these like DIY, internet information age.
Right.
So just give that a thought. Is it really, it might be a fool's bargain spending all this time trying to learn stuff on your own rather than just, spending a little time with coaching.
Yeah.
All right, that's my plug.
Yeah. I like it. I think that's a good stopping point there.
Sign us off, sir.
All right. Thank you for tuning in to the Weights and Plates podcast. You can find me at weightsandplates.com or on Instagram at _Robert_Santana. You can find my gym at weights_and_plates.
Very good. You can find me on Instagram at marmalade_cream, or you can go find me on the internets, jonesbarbellclub.com. That's where I offer coaching services. So if you need a coach, whether it's in person or online coaching, hit me up there. You can send me a message and we'll get you to the right place. All right, we'll talk to you again in a couple weeks.